Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mysterious Murmurs. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1, The Echoing Manor. A blanket of mist clung to the sprawling grounds of Blackthorn Manor as the old gates groaned open. 4 figures stepped out of their van, their breaths misting in the cold October air. This was their most ambitious investigation yet, an abandoned mansion rumored to capture voices. "This place gives me the creeps already," muttered Claire, tightening her scarf as she glanced at the looming structure ahead. "Perfect for our season finale," said Marcus, the team's lead and self-proclaimed skeptic. His camera rig was already perched on his shoulder, its red light blinking steadily. Behind them, Lucy, the group's tech expert, checked her equipment, while Ben, the historian, rifled through his notebook. The mansion belonged to the Eldridge family, wealthy socialites in the 1800s. It's said they all vanished one night, leaving their dinner table still set, Ben explained. "And the echoes?" Claire asked. "They say the walls absorb sound. You can still hear every word, every scream that's ever been spoken here," he replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. The group pushed open the double doors, the sound reverberating unnaturally. The interior was a time capsule of grandeur, a sweeping staircase, faded wallpaper, and chandeliers coated in cobwebs. Their footsteps echoed, but the sound seemed off, too sharp, as if the walls were mocking them. Lucy set up her devices. "Let's test the acoustics," she suggested, clapping her hands. The sound bounced back, distorted, but there was something else, a faint whisper layered beneath the echo. "Did you hear that?" Claire whispered. Marcus chuckled. "Probably just the wind. Let's split up. We'll cover more ground that way." Reluctantly, they divided. Claire's discovery. Claire wandered through the west wing, her flashlight beam cutting through the thick gloom. The portraits lining the walls depicted the Eldridge family. A stern-looking father, a smiling mother, and 2 children with unsettlingly lifelike eyes. As she moved, the painted eyes seemed to follow her. "Hello," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Hello." Her own voice echoed back, but there was a strange delay, and beneath it she could hear whispers, dozens of them, layered and overlapping. She froze, her heart hammering. "Who's there?" she demanded. The whispers stopped abruptly. Then one voice stood out, clear and chilling. "Get out." Marcus's doubts. In the grand ballroom, Marcus filmed the decayed opulence. He narrated confidently, dismissing the mansion's legends as folklore. "This is nothing but creaking wood and bad acoustics," he declared. But as he played back his footage to check the audio, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Behind his voice, another one spoke, faint but unmistakable. "Stay forever." He spun around, but the room was empty. Shaking his head, he muttered, "I'm just imagining things." The chandelier above him swayed slightly, though the air was deathly still. Lucy's warning. Lucy sat cross-legged in the parlor, monitoring her audio equipment. The spectral frequencies spiked wildly. "That's not normal," she muttered, adjusting the dials. Static crackled, then cleared, and a voice spoke through the speakers. "Help us, trapped, don't listen to the echoes." Her blood ran cold. She scrambled to call the others on her walkie-talkie. "Guys, we've got something big. Meet me in the parlor now." As she waited, the room grew colder. Her breath puffed out in misty clouds, and the static on her equipment intensified. The whispers began again, circling her like vultures. The historian's revelation. Ben found the library, its shelves sagging under the weight of dusty tomes. He combed through the records, piecing together the Eldridge family's tragic history. The father had been an ambitious industrialist, obsessed with immortality. Rumors of strange experiments and forbidden rituals surrounded him. He stumbled upon a journal, the pages filled with ramblings about capturing the soul's essence and preserving the echoes of life. The last entry sent chills down his spine. The walls listen. They hunger for voices, for fear. One day, they will echo no more. They will speak for themselves. Ben's flashlight flickered. In the silence, he heard a child's laughter, high-pitched and haunting. The haunting unfolds. Reuniting in the parlor, the group shared their findings, their nerves frayed. Marcus dismissed their fears, but even he couldn't explain the strange phenomena. We need to leave, Claire insisted, her voice shaking. Before they could act, the mansion came alive. The walls groaned, their wooden panels warping. Shadows moved independently of the light, forming vague human shapes. Stay with us. The voice echoed from all directions, a chorus of despair. The shadows grew bolder, stepping out from the walls. Their faces were indistinct, but their eyes burned with malevolence. Ben whispered, "The echoes. They're the souls of everyone who's ever died here. They're trapped. And they want us to join them," Lucy added grimly. The descent into chaos. The group ran, the shadows pursuing them relentlessly. Doors slammed shut on their own, and hallways twisted, leading them in circles. The whispers became deafening, screaming accusations and pleas. Marcus, desperate to prove his bravado, turned to confront the shadows. "You're not real," he shouted. A shadow lunged, its form melding into his body. He collapsed, writhing as his screams joined the cacophony. "Marcus!" Claire screamed, but Ben pulled her away. "He's gone. We have to keep moving." The ritual of release. In the library, Ben found a ritual detailed in the journal, a way to silence the echoes and free the trapped souls. It required fire and a personal offering. "We need to burn the journal and offer something of ourselves," he explained. Claire grabbed the journal. "I'll do it." "No, it's too dangerous," Lucy protested, but Claire was already lighting the match. As the flames consumed the journal, the mansion shuddered violently. The shadows screamed, their forms disintegrating. The walls began to collapse, and the group made a mad dash for the exit. The aftermath. The aftermath. Outside, the manor crumbled into rubble, its echoes finally silenced. Marcus was gone, his voice forever part of the mansion's whispers. Claire, Ben, and Lucy stood in the clearing, their faces pale and tear-streaked. "It's over," Claire whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure. Months later, Lucy reviewed their footage. Every recording was blank, except for one, a single frame showing Marcus's face, his mouth open in a silent scream. Story 2: Midnight Callers. Samir was used to strange passengers. As a night shift taxi driver in a bustling city, he'd ferried his share of oddballs, drunk partiers, eccentric artists, and sleep-deprived office workers. But something about the man who slid into the back seat that night was different. 47 Eldridge Street, the passenger said. His voice was smooth but flat, devoid of inflection. He wore a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, shadowing most of his face. "Sure thing," Samir replied, pulling the taxi out onto the street. The destination was unfamiliar, but that wasn't unusual in a city this size. As they drove, the man sat unnervingly still, not even adjusting his posture as the cab jolted over potholes. Samir adjusted his rearview mirror, trying to get a better look, but the man's face remained obscured. When they reached the address, Samir frowned. It wasn't a building, just a vacant lot overgrown with weeds. "Here we are," Samir said hesitantly. The man didn't move. You need anything else?" The passenger slowly turned his head toward Samir. His eyes gleamed faintly in the dim light. "Another will come soon." Before Samir could respond, the man opened the door and stepped out. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving the cab door ajar. The second passenger, Samir tried to shake off the encounter as a fluke, but the unease lingered. He closed the door, reset his meter, and drove back toward the main roads. Not 10 minutes later, a woman flagged him down. She was pale, her thin frame wrapped in an old-fashioned shawl. 47 Eldridge Street, she said softly, her voice trembling. Samir's stomach twisted. "Are you sure?" She nodded, climbing in without another word. The ride was eerily silent. This passenger, too, remained motionless, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When they arrived at the same vacant lot, she muttered, "Thank you," and stepped out. Samir rolled down his window. "Hey, wait, what's at this address?" The woman froze, her back to him. "You'll see," she whispered, before vanishing into the dark. The pattern emerges over the next week. Samir found himself picking up more passengers with the same strange request. They came at odd hours, always asking for 47 Eldridge Street. Some were well-dressed, others looked as if they'd stepped out of another century. None of them seemed quite alive. They never paid. They never stayed. They simply disappeared into the shadows. Samir's curiosity grew into obsession. He began researching the address, but there was no record of any building or notable event at that lot. His friends dismissed his stories as fatigue-induced hallucinations, but he knew what he'd seen. And then one night the pattern broke. The child's warning. A small boy climbed into the cab, clutching a tattered teddy bear. His clothes were muddy, and his face was streaked with grime. 47 Eldridge Street, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Samir hesitated. Kid, where are your parents? The boy's eyes welled with tears. They're waiting for me there. Please, sir, I have to go. Against his better judgment, Samir started the engine. As they neared the lot, the boy spoke again. You shouldn't come here. They don't like it when you stay too long. Samir gripped the wheel tighter. Who are they? The boy didn't answer. When they arrived, the boy stepped out and turned back to Samir, his expression grave. Leave before midnight, he warned. Then he too vanished into the darkness. A dangerous curiosity. Samir parked his cab a block away and walked back to the lot, flashlight in hand. The overgrown weeds rustled in the cold wind, but the space was empty. He explored the perimeter, his heart racing. It was almost midnight. Just as he decided to leave, his flashlight flickered and died. A faint glow appeared at the center of the lot, illuminating a group of figures. They stood in a circle, their heads bowed, their forms flickering like static on an old television. Samir's breath hitched. He recognized some of them, the man with the hat, the woman in the shawl, the boy with the teddy bear. The figures began to chant in unison, their voices merging into an otherworldly hum. The truth revealed. Samir. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. He spun around, but no one was there. Why do you linger? The figures turned to face him, their eyes glowing faintly. The man with the hat stepped forward. This is the crossroads, he said, his voice echoing unnaturally, where the living and the dead meet. You were never meant to see this. Samir stumbled back, his mind racing. Why do you all come here? What do you want? We don't want, the man replied. We wait for the ferryman. A grim realization. Samir's blood ran cold. He was the ferryman. His cab wasn't just a taxi, it was a vessel, ferrying lost souls to their final destination. No, he muttered, shaking his head. This can't be real. I'm just a driver. You are chosen, the man said, stepping closer. But you've lingered too long. Now you must stay. The figures advanced, their forms flickering more violently. Samir turned and ran, but the lot seemed to stretch infinitely, the shadows swallowing him whole. The final fare. Samir woke up in his cab, drenched in sweat. His meter was running, though the car was parked. A new passenger sat in the back seat, a woman in a sleek black dress. 47 Eldridge Street, she said. Samir turned to face her, but her face was shrouded in shadow. He swallowed hard, started the engine, and drove. When they reached the lot, the woman leaned forward. Thank you for your service, she said, her voice a blend of all the voices he'd heard before. Samir froze, his hands gripping the wheel. What happens now? The woman smiled, her teeth gleaming unnaturally. Now you join us. Before Samir could react, the cab filled with a blinding light. The endless drive. Weeks later, a new driver took Samir's old route. He bought the cab at an auction, thrilled to have his own business. On his first night, he picked up a man in a dark coat and hat. 47 Eldridge Street, the passenger said. The driver hesitated, glancing back. Never heard of it. Is it far? The man smiled faintly. Not far, just drive. The cycle began anew. Story 3, The Scent of Ash. Holly Lane's small perfumery was her sanctuary. Tucked away in a sleepy coastal town, the shop was where she crafted scents that enchanted customers. Each bottle was a unique blend, capturing emotions and memories. But despite her success, Holly yearned for something more. A fragrance so rare and unforgettable, it could define her career. One morning as Holly walked along the shore, gathering wildflowers, her foot struck something buried in the sand. She knelt to uncover a weathered wooden box, its hinges rusted. Inside was a bundle of dried black flowers, their petals brittle yet strangely fragrant. The scent was unlike anything Holly had encountered, a mix of sweetness and smoke, like a field of lavender burning under a summer sun. Her heart raced as she inhaled deeply, already imagining the possibility. The fragrance of mystery. Back at her shop, Holly carefully distilled the flowers into an essential oil. The resulting fragrance was intoxicating, haunting even. She named it Ember Bloom. Her customers were entranced. People traveled from neighboring towns just to buy a vial. They described the scent as otherworldly, stirring long-forgotten memories. "It's like a dream you can't quite remember," one woman said, clutching the bottle tightly. But Holly noticed something peculiar. Her customers grew obsessive, returning repeatedly for more. Some claimed they couldn't sleep without it. Others spoke of strange visions. One man confided, "When I wear it, I see fields of ash and faces that don't belong to me." Holly brushed off the remarks as overactive imagination. The first nightmare. That night, Holly awoke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, heart pounding, but her shop was silent and intact. Yet the scent lingered, stronger now, wrapping around her like an unwelcome embrace. She stumbled to the workshop, where the bottle of ember bloom sat on her desk. Its scent filled the room, though the vial was tightly sealed. In the corner of her eye, Holly thought she saw movement, a shadow flickering across the wall. When she turned, it was gone. She barely slept. The dark history, determined to uncover the flower's origin, Holly revisited the beach where she'd found them. An old fisherman saw her rummaging and approached. "You shouldn't be digging there," he warned. "Why not?" Holly asked. The man hesitated, then sighed. "That land used to belong to Blackthorn Manor. Burned down years ago. Some say the fire wasn't natural. Strange things happened there, and the flowers..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "What about the flowers?" Holly pressed. "They grow where the dead don't rest." The obsession deepens. Despite the warnings, Holly couldn't stop producing ember bloom. The scent had taken on a life of its own, its demand overwhelming. Customers begged her to make more, some even offering exorbitant sums. But the nightmares persisted. Each night, Holly dreamed of blackened fields stretching endlessly. Figures wandered through the haze, silent, faceless, and searching. The visions began to bleed into her waking life. She'd catch glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, or hear faint whispers when alone. One day, while mixing a new batch of ember bloom, Holly felt a cold hand brush against her arm. She spun around, but no one was there. The warning signs, her assistant Clara noticed Holly's growing paranoia. "Are you okay? You've been on edge lately." "It's just the stress," Holly lied. But Clara wasn't convinced. She brought Holly a newspaper clipping she'd found while researching Blackthorn Manor. The article described the estate's destruction, mentioning a bizarre detail. The fire had originated in a field of black flowers. Witnesses claimed the flames didn't spread naturally, but seemed to move with purpose, consuming everything in their path. "They called it cursed land," Clara said. "Maybe these flowers are dangerous." Holly dismissed the idea, but doubt crept into her mind. Desperate experiment. That evening, Holly decided to test the flowers. She burned a single petal in her workshop, hoping to understand their properties. As the petal disintegrated, the air grew heavy. The room filled with thick smoke, though the fire was small. In the haze, shadows emerged, twisted forms with hollow eyes. They whispered in unison, "You took what wasn't yours." Holly stumbled backward, knocking over the vial of ember bloom. The oil spilled onto the floor, and the shadows recoiled, their whispers turning to anguished wails. Realizing the oil's power, Holly knew she had to destroy it. The final confrontation. Holly gathered every bottle of ember bloom and carried them to the beach. The flowers had been found here. It seemed fitting to return their essence to the earth. As she prepared to pour the oil into the sand, the wind picked up, howling through the dunes. The scent of ash filled the air, and the shadows appeared again, rising from the ground. "You cannot undo what's been done," they hissed. Holly's hands trembled, but she stood firm. "I never meant to harm anyone," she said. "Let me make it right." The shadows swirled around her, their forms coalescing into a towering figure. Its voice was deep and resonant. Sacrifices required, the ultimate price Holly understood. To break the curse, she had to give something of herself. She opened the largest bottle of ember bloom and poured it into the sand, its fragrance overpowering. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into the air. But the towering figure remained. "Your voice," it said. Holly hesitated, then nodded. The figure reached out, and Holly felt a searing pain in her throat. When it was over, she could no longer speak. The flowers crumbled to dust, their curse broken. The aftermath. Holly returned to her shop, now silent in more ways than one. The scent of ember bloom was gone, as were the obsessive customers. She communicated through notes and gestures, her voice forever lost. But the nightmares ceased, and the shadows no longer haunted her. On her desk sat a single black petal, a reminder of the price she had paid. And though she could no longer speak, her silence carried the weight of 1,000 words. Some beauty is best left undiscovered. Story 4. The Black Tape. The thrift store smelled of old wood and mothballs, a comforting scent for Ryan, a young filmmaker hunting for cheap props. His indie horror short needed authenticity, and this dusty shop seemed like the perfect place to find it. At the back of the store, amid a stack of old VHS tapes, one caught his eye. Its label was handwritten, "Do not watch." Ryan chuckled. "Perfect marketing," he muttered, tossing it into his cart. Back home, he dusted off his old VHS player, the relic of his childhood, and popped in the tape. The screen crackled to life with static before revealing a dimly lit room that looked eerily familiar. His stomach dropped. The room on the tape was his own living room. The tape's first play. Ryan leaned closer to the screen, his heart pounding. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. Same couch, same coffee table, even the same small crack in the wall by the window. The camera panned slowly across the room, then stopped, focusing on the doorway. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a shadow crossed the doorway, fleeting but distinct. "Okay, that's creepy," Ryan muttered, though he tried to laugh it off. The screen went dark. The tape ejected itself. Ryan sat back uneasy. Must be some weird art project, he reasoned, though the rationalization felt hollow. The first night. That night, Ryan lay in bed replaying the tape in his mind. Every creak of the house made his nerves tighten. At 2:43 a.m., he heard a faint thud from the living room. He hesitated, then grabbed his phone and tiptoed down the hallway. The living room was as it should be, empty and still, but the VHS tape was sitting in the middle of the coffee table. He was certain he had left it on the shelf. "Great," he muttered. "Now I'm sleepwalking." He returned to bed, but his sleep was restless, haunted by dreams of shadows moving through his house. The second play the next morning, Ryan couldn't resist. He slid the tape back into the player. The screen showed the same living room, but now the camera was positioned closer to the couch. A figure stood in the doorway, tall, motionless, its face obscured by shadow. Ryan's breath hitched. He paused the tape and rewound it. The figure wasn't there before. "What the hell?" He grabbed his phone and filmed the TV screen as he played the tape again. This time, the figure moved, its head tilting slowly, almost imperceptibly. Ryan's phone slipped from his hand. The shadows grow. Ryan spent hours trying to convince himself it was a trick, a clever editing prank, but the fear gnawed at him. That night, the house felt different. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, and every sound echoed unnaturally. At 3 a.m., he heard footsteps, not faint creaks, but deliberate, heavy steps pacing back and forth in the living room. Ryan locked his bedroom door, clutching a baseball bat. The footsteps stopped just outside. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice trembling. Silence, then a low whisper, "Watch the tape." The third play. Terrified but compelled, Ryan watched the tape again the next morning. The footage now showed him, sitting on the couch, watching the tape. His own terrified face stared back at him. "No, this isn't possible," he whispered. The camera panned to the doorway, where the shadowy figure now stood, closer than before. Its hand reached out, pointing directly at Ryan on the screen. A new sound emerged from the tape, heavy breathing, growing louder. Ryan's own breath matched it, syncing perfectly. The tape ejected itself once more. The descent into madness. Ryan tried to get rid of the tape. He drove to a landfill and threw it into a pit of garbage, relieved to be free of it. But when he returned home, the tape was waiting on the coffee table. He tried burning it, but the flames extinguished themselves, leaving the tape unscathed. Desperate, Ryan smashed the VHS player and threw it out. But that night, he woke to find the player and the tape, perfectly intact, sitting on his dresser. "Why me?" he screamed, his voice breaking. The shadows on the walls seemed to quiver in response. A cry for help. Ryan turned to his best friend Alex for help. "It's just a tape, man," Alex said, though he couldn't hide his unease. "Then watch it," Ryan challenged. Reluctantly, Alex agreed. The two sat in silence as the footage played, showing the now familiar living room and the shadowy figure. But this time the figure stepped forward. Its face was still obscured, but its hand reached out of the screen, its fingers impossibly long. Alex yanked the tape out of the player. "Dude, what the hell is this?" "I don't know," Ryan shouted. "I can't get rid of it." Alex backed away. "I can't help you, man. This isn't normal." The final play alone and desperate, Ryan watched the tape one last time. The footage was different. The camera now followed the shadowy figure as it moved through the house, pausing in each room. Ryan's stomach sank as the figure entered his bedroom. On the screen, it stood over his sleeping form, its hand hovering inches from his face. The figure turned to the camera, revealing a featureless, pitch-black face. Its voice was low and guttural. "You let me in." The screen went dark, and Ryan felt a presence behind him. The vanishing days later, Alex stopped by Ryan's house, worried after his friend hadn't answered his calls. The house was eerily quiet, and Ryan was nowhere to be found. The only clue was the VHS tape, sitting in the middle of the living room. Alex picked it up, hesitated, then slid it into the player. The footage showed Ryan's empty living room. The camera panned to the couch, where Alex now sat, staring at the screen. Behind him, a shadowy figure loomed. Story 5. Beneath the Frozen Lake. The first snow of the year blanketed the tiny village of Arkenwell in silence. Tucked deep in the northern wilderness, the town thrived on isolation. Its people were accustomed to harsh winters, but the frozen lake at the village's edge was always a source of wonder and unease. Legends surrounded the lake. Elders whispered tales of an ancient spirit bound beneath its icy surface. Some claimed to have seen flickering lights below the ice, while others spoke of whispers carried by the wind. Most dismissed the stories as folklore, but young Finn couldn't resist the lure of the unknown. The ice breaks. It was a crisp afternoon when Finn and his friends decided to skate on the lake. The surface glimmered in the fading sunlight, smooth and flawless. "Race you to the middle," Finn shouted, laughing as he sped ahead. His friends followed, their laughter echoing across the frozen expanse. But as Finn reached the center, a deep groan reverberated through the ice. He stopped abruptly, heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" he called out. Before anyone could respond, the ice beneath him cracked with a deafening snap. Finn plunged into the freezing water, the world around him vanishing in a rush of cold and darkness. The rescue Finn's friends screamed and scrambled to the edge of the hole, pulling him out with trembling hands. His body was pale and motionless, his lips blue. They rushed him back to the village, where the healer worked to warm his frozen body. Hours later, Finn awoke with a start, gasping for air. "You're lucky to be alive," the healer said, her voice stern. But Finn barely heard her. His mind was consumed by what he had seen beneath the ice. Flickering lights, shadows moving in the depths, and a faint, echoing voice calling his name. The whispers began. In the days that followed, Finn couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. At night, he dreamed of the lake, its surface cracking open to reveal a swirling abyss. In his dreams, a voice whispered to him, soft yet insistent, "Come back." He began to hear the voice during the day too, faint but persistent. When he told his parents, they dismissed it as trauma from the accident. But the whispers grew louder, and Finn found himself drawn back to the lake, his curiosity outweighing his fear. The village's secret. One evening, Finn overheard his parents talking in hushed tones. "We can't let him go back there," his mother said. "Not after what happened to the others." The others? Finn's heart raced as he pressed his ear to the door. His father sighed. "The lake takes those it wants. We've lost too many already." Finn confronted them, demanding answers. Reluctantly, they told him of the village's dark history. Every few decades, someone was drawn to the lake, vanishing without a trace. The elders believed the lake demanded sacrifices to keep the spirit beneath it at bay. "You can't let it take you," his mother pleaded, her eyes filled with fear. A dangerous curiosity. Despite their warnings, Finn couldn't stay away. The whispers became unbearable, an endless litany that echoed in his mind. One moonlit night, he returned to the lake. The ice glowed faintly, as if illuminated from below. He stepped onto the surface, each crunch of his boots sending shivers up his spine. "Show yourself," he whispered. The wind howled in response, and the ice beneath him darkened. Shapes began to form, shadowy figures twisting and writhing beneath the surface. One figure stood out, a woman with flowing hair and glowing eyes. She pressed her hands against the ice, staring up at Finn. "Help us," she mouthed. "The search for answers." Terrified but determined, Finn sought out the village elder, an old man named Greer. "Tell me the truth about the lake," Finn demanded. Greer sighed, his weathered face grim. The lake was once a sacred place, a gateway between worlds. But centuries ago, the spirit of the lake was angered by greed and bloodshed. It cursed the waters, trapping the souls of the lost beneath the ice. "Can it be stopped?" Finn asked. Greer hesitated. "There's an old ritual, but it's dangerous. You would need to confront the spirit directly and offer something it cannot resist." "What does it want?" "Fear," Greer replied. "It feeds on fear." The descent. The descent. Beneath, armed with Greer's instructions, Finn prepared for the ritual. He carried only a lantern and a rope tied around his waist, anchored to a tree. As midnight approached, he returned to the lake. The ice seemed to pulse with energy, the shadows beneath it growing clearer. Finn lit the lantern and stepped to the center, where the ice had cracked before. "Take me," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The ice groaned, and a massive crack split beneath him. Finn plunged into the freezing water, the light of his lantern barely penetrating the darkness. The world below. The water was impossibly deep, stretching into an endless void. Flickering lights surrounded Finn, souls trapped beneath the lake, their faces twisted in silent agony. The woman from before appeared, her movements fluid and ethereal. She reached out, and Finn hesitated before taking her hand. She pulled him deeper, guiding him to the lake's heart. There the spirit awaited, a towering figure of shadow and ice, its eyes glowing with malevolence. "You dare challenge me?" the spirit thundered, its voice shaking the water. "I've come to free them," Finn said, mustering all his courage. The spirit laughed, a sound that reverberated through Finn's very bones. The battle of wills. The spirit loomed closer, its presence suffocating. It reached for Finn, its icy tendrils wrapping around him. "You cannot resist me," it hissed. "Your fear sustains me." Finn clenched his fists, focusing on the warmth of his resolve. "I'm not afraid of you." The lantern in his hand flared, its light cutting through the darkness. The spirit recoiled, its form flickering. The trapped souls around him began to glow, their light growing brighter as Finn's courage swelled. "Release them," he shouted, the lantern's light blazing. Icy flew the spirit's fall. The spirit shrieked, its icy form cracking and splintering. The trapped souls burst free, their light overwhelming the darkness. The woman smiled at Finn, her expression one of gratitude and peace. "Thank you," she whispered before vanishing. The water around Finn began to swirl, pulling him upward. He broke through the surface, gasping for air. The lake's silence. The lake was still as Finn crawled onto the shore. The ice was smooth and unbroken, as if nothing had happened. In the days that followed, the whispers ceased, and the villagers noticed a change. The lake, once a source of fear, now seemed peaceful. Finn never spoke of what he had seen beneath the ice, but he often visited the lake, feeling a quiet connection to the souls he had freed. And though the spirit was gone, Finn knew the lake would always hold its secrets.